Good morning, everybody, and good Shabbos. Perhaps like you, I used to really enjoy watching cable news, even listening to those who I may disagree with politically. There was a time when we could find respectful dialogue, and I appreciated the constructive debates and arguments from both sides of the aisle. They were rational arguments that made me think, that would push me sometimes to even reconsider my own views or reinforce the views that I already had. Regardless, it was a joy. It was a pleasure. It was an intellectual exercise to hear what intelligent and respectful people had to say. Today, forget it. You can't watch cable news without being bombarded by people on both sides who are not only disrespectful, but accuse the other side of lies, falsehoods, sometimes even worse. I now find it to be such an emotional and taxing process to watch. Instead of learning, you're just riled up and emotionally spent, filled with the latest rumors, innuendos, fabrications, and smears. Lately, it feels as though Americans can only agree on one thing, that we don't disagree very well. And it seems to affect all of us, our elected officials. Almost nothing constructive seems to get done as relations between those on the left and on the right continue to get even worse. And our lack of national and respectful discourse on a national level has ramifications on a local level. I see it sometimes even in our own Jewish community, more than ever before. Perhaps you see it or feel it as well. Those on opposing sides when it comes to Israel, our own organizations, or even a beloved and longtime bakery, have a hard time listening to the other side. And when you don't listen to the other side, it's very difficult to have a real and helpful discussion. Sometimes I'll get calls from angry people, and they just go on and on and on without ever allowing me the opportunity to present the other side of the story, an opposing view. They just want to yell and scream. Why is this happening? And why does it seem to be getting only worse? Can we find some help in our Jewish tradition? Something very disturbing happens in our Torah portion this week. While we're wandering in the wilderness, the Israelites, between Egypt and the land of Israel, an unnamed man, who is the son of an Israelite mother and an Egyptian father, gets into an argument with an Israelite man. And as a result, the man curses God's name, his holy name, in front of many other Israelites. Everyone is shocked. This has never happened before. A man has profaned God's name, and they don't know what to do. So they drag the man to Moses. They tell him what happened. And Moses is also stumped, not sure, should he follow through with the rule, the commandment, not to use God's name in vain? So Moses tells the Israelites, keep this man confined and let me consult with God. God's decree, death by stoning. And everyone who heard the news is called upon to participate. It's a pretty gruesome story, and it raises all sorts of questions. Through the centuries, our best minds have looked at the story and tried to fill in the holes. Why don't we know the man's name? And interestingly enough, in the midst of the story, the Torah doesn't ever tell us this man's name, but yet it spends time to tell us that the mother's name was Shulamit, and she was the daughter of Dibri from the tribe of Dan. Now, why do we need such a lengthy presentation of this anonymous person's family and kin? Why do we get this detail? Alone, he provoked the fight. He cursed God alone. Why involve the innocent mother, grandfather, and tribe? The rabbis of antiquity assumed that the Torah would never waste words on unnecessary information. We find many examples throughout our rabbinic tradition that if a word is added, a detail is given, nothing is superfluous. There's a reason for everything in the Torah. And so the rabbis give us an answer. If the name of the mother and tribe are here, the Torah must have meant to teach us something. But what could that be by simply knowing the name of the mother, the grandfather, and the tribe of this blasphemer? According to Rashi, the great medieval French commentator, her name, Shulamit, comes from the word shalom. She is the daughter of Dibri, meaning I speak. His mother, Rashi tells us, was an incessant talker who would constantly greet people with the word shalom and then just keep going and going and going. You know the type. Her father's name, the grandfather, was Dibri. That comes from the Hebrew word davar, which means word. Clearly, the father, the grandfather, was also a talker. He loved to just use words and talk and talk and talk. And the tribe Dan, according to tradition, that tribe amongst the 12 tribes of Israel was known for being the most argumentative group of all. This poor guy, he couldn't help but talk and talk and talk. Look where he comes from. Look the example the rabbis teach us that his mother and grandfather and even his tribe gave him. He was the type, according to the rabbis, that would go on and on and on without ever stopping to pause and to just listen to the other side. He would just tell his side of the story without ever giving someone else the chance to present their views. Sound familiar? It should be of no surprise that this man, this incessant talker, would eventually do something so wrong, like curse the name of God in the midst of an argument. I'm going to say, of course, that death is a very harsh judgment. But I can see the importance of all of us recognizing how important our words are. How words probably made this man feel hopeless and small and very angry. And how words bring worlds into creation, how they can bring worlds into disaster. How words can bully and how words can hurt. We can choose our words wisely and well and strengthen our community rather than harm it. But this blasphemer, this man, certainly did not make the correct choice. And perhaps on a deeper level, by this story, is the Torah teaching us that this man wasn't just cursing God's name. He was also cursing a chance for constructive, practical, and helpful dialogue. And by doing so, God is saying to us, this man had to leave the tribe, that we needed better examples, that this incessant talker was not the example God wanted for our people. Something that we as Jews have always respected and in many ways felt was a very godly exercise is practical and respectful dialogue. Just look at our tradition. If you go home tonight and you Google the word Talmud, Google will tell you that the Talmud comprises 2,711 pages. But that number is misleading. The great Talmud has pages that are large and wide and subdivided into pages within pages. So closer to 6,000 pages would be more like it. And packed into that dense and challenging text is a bit of everything: legal commentary, mental gymnastics, and bizarre, sometimes mystical personal narratives. Each page of the Talmud has one thing in common. Despite the many lengthy arguments, they all feature polite, meticulous, and a creative style of argument. The great Talmud of the Jewish tradition is filled with debaters who find themselves on opposing sides of numerous disagreements. Yet these opponents don't work as enemies. They don't make personal attacks. They come off as collegial sparring partners, testing ideas for weaknesses and inconsistencies, aiming not to win, but to find emes, to find truth. That's the goal of the rabbis of the Talmud. Writer Danielle Greenbaum Davis offers the following advice. In today's very impolite society of America of 2019, when a person says or tweets something absurd or nonsensical, the widespread instinct today seems to pounce, to dismiss it, to condemn it, and sometimes even to silence it. But in the great Talmud, the response is quite different. Even crazy ideas stir the lofty arguers of the Talmud to look inward, wondering whether they might be missing something. There's one great example, because the Talmud features two overarching schools of thought that are almost constantly in conflict. The great Rabbi Shammai and Hillel, who had their own schools of thought. Beit Shammai, the house of Hillel, versus Beit Shammai versus Beit Hillel, the great house of Hillel. And these two academies, Hillel and Shammai, have hundreds, if not thousands, of debates. But the debates are mostly resolved in traditional fashion. Both viewpoints are aired and examined, and eventually a defect in an argument is discovered. But there are times, many times, a more intriguing solution. The Talmud tells a great story of a 3-year debate. Imagine that. These rabbis were so sincere and so dedicated to their views and the views of the other side that they debated an issue for 3 years. After all that time, the rabbis are no closer to deciding the law. It's time to call in a backup. They ask God, which side should we follow, Shammai or Hillel? According to the story, a voice descends from the heavens and declares that both opinions are the words of God. However, the divine voice also declares that the law is in accordance with the opinion of the house of Hillel. If God's answer stumped you, you're not alone. How could both sides be right, both be words of the living God, both sides be truth, and yet God says we have to side with Hillel? The compilers of the Talmud were likewise confused. They asked, since both these are the words of the living God, why does Hillel have the halakha, the Jewish law, established in accordance with his opinion? The answer, my friends, could form the manual on disagreement that the United States could use right now. Because the Talmud explains that the house of Hillel had its teaching established as law because in the context of the debate, its members were patient, its members were decent, its members were kind, and because they remained so even when they were being challenged. And the rabbis of the house of Hillel go even further. Their educators taught their students of all ages both their own teachings and the teachings of the opposing side, the house of Shammai. And when they were teaching a dispute, they went so far as to teach Shammai's teachings first out of deference. Could you ever imagine that happening today? A Democrat or a Republican, an elected official, someone on cable news, first offering the opposing view out of deference and respect? That would never happen today. Yes, in this day and age, we rarely listen to the other side because we've forgotten how to debate the issues we care about that are of vital importance to the future of our country. Perhaps what's needed is a crash course in debate, a manual for how to rationally, practically, and productively disagree with one another. Fortunately, we as Jews have one, the Talmud. And if we want to fix what's badly broken in our own discourse, whether it's on a national or more local level, the rabbis of our Talmud offer a great example. Can we follow that dugma, that example set for us thousands of years ago that may not be more important than ever before? The rabbis of the Talmud show us how to debate because they first listen to the other side in a rational, respectful, and decent manner. Can we follow their example and perhaps serve as a model for truly constructive debate that's needed in our country today, that can take communities such as ours to better and higher places, in a country that needs model communities more than ever before? I'm excited to tell you that amongst many new programs we have next year, starting in November, we're organizing a series of constructive debates with members of our community and in the greater Houston community to come to Beth Yeshurun and debate issues that we may think about on a daily basis. Members of the community from the right and the left who will debate constructively and respectfully issues that we no longer hear debated respectfully on cable news today. But we're going to try it here at Beth Yeshurun. And it will just be the beginning, we hope, God willing, of years of respectful debates. Not so one side could win, but so we can all be pushed to understand where the other side's coming from. And therefore, my hope is by understanding where the other side is coming from, we can learn to respect the other side. And also by modeling respectful debates, perhaps we can do so in our own personal lives as well. Not arguing issues to death at the dinner table, but instead learning to listen to the other side. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.